Thank you. And if you are watching us on June 5 at 8 p.m., then you are watching us live tonight. And our show is terrific. We've been thinking about it for the past month. And once again, we have on people that we had last week. Mellani Calvin, thank you, Mellani, for coming. And Chris Keith, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And last time we were talking about finances and the idea about a guaranteed income. We may hear about that in the future. But tonight, it's tips for applying for Social Security disability. Let me repeat that, tips for applying for Social Security disability. And Mellani has been working in this field for a long time and knows the ins and outs and the difficulties. You were just saying earlier how many people don't know what to do, and it stops them from doing that.
That's right, right.
There's so many ins, well, and also you're talking about how to ensure that your forms are met, you're documenting, and also don't trust necessarily that you understand it.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit.
Well, first off, I want to say that this is a really great opportunity to talk about this. It's something that I've been doing for the last 17 years, and it's definitely confusing for people who are really not able to support themselves through work and are really not sure if they should try and apply for disability. Excuse me. And there is a lot of myth out there about who should be applying, and I started Assist. That's the nonprofit that I am the executive director for. I started Assist because there's just not enough resources for people, you know, to actually help get the process started well. And so I actually started a training company as well, and so I have a lot of tutorial information, but what I wanted to do is go through this, you know, kind of these talking points, and then open it up to questions, because there's always questions.
Well, you know, if any listeners out there have questions about Social Security disability, how to get on and how to apply, please call up and let us know your questions. Our number here is 503-650-0198, 503-650-0198. Mellani will be happy to answer them.
Yes. And I entertain questions along the way.
And you know, something that maybe for the viewers, for them to understand how important what you're talking about really is, I have a few stats up here from the SSA, and 62% of aged beneficiaries received at least half of their income from Social Security. And that's a really important thing. When you're talking about, you know, what you're working on is trying to help people get into that, when you're talking about 62% of people accounting this as half of their total income, that's not a small amount of money.
No, but that 62% is mostly retirees.
Right.
So we're talking about the disability process.
Oh, that's right.
30% or something.
And it's so basically, well, I'm just going to add one more thing before I kind of get into the step-by-step stuff, but you're exactly right. That is not much to live on, and most of us are going to be in that boat, for sure. So I think that the one thing that's really overlooked, and it is another really big reason why I started Assist, is because a lot of homeless people are severely disabled and they can't make it through this system without help. There are a lot of barriers to all kinds of, you know, housing barriers and food barriers and medical barriers, but there's also big income barriers. And so we at Assist focus a lot on the disabled and indigent. Once we get people on disability benefits, it has a really big ripple effect in the community. Those folks become consumers again. They use that disability money in the local economy. And it brings a lot of dignity back. Even though no one wants to be declared disabled, it brings a lot of dignity back to them to have some source of income. One of the biggest questions, the first question that I always get asked is, what's the difference between SSD and SSI? Yep. And I wanted to go over that. So Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, comes from the same FICA taxes that's taken out of every paycheck. And it goes into the Social Security Trust Fund with your Social Security number on it. And it's there for, those funds are there for when you retire, and if you pass away, survivor's benefits, and if you become disabled before you retire. But the Social Security disability application process is really long and complicated.
Can money pass between the two funds?
No. So we've got, those two programs have two completely different pots of money. So SSD, Social Security Disability, is from the FICA taxes taken out of everybody's paycheck. SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, is from another pot of money, and that's the Federal General Fund. That's where all the other welfare program monies come from. TANF and food stamps and Medicaid, those are everybody's taxes. And a lot of people don't realize.
I didn't know that. Thank you for explaining. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a medical insurance component that oftentimes is really, really important for people filing for disability also. So if you're filing for SSD, or Social Security Disability, the insurance component that's attached to that is Medicare. So if you retire, you get Medicare. And if you're found eligible for disability through this lengthy application process, then you get Medicare also, but there's like a 2-year wait for it. So the medical insurance component to SSI, or the welfare programs, is Medicaid, right? So families that are getting TANF, they usually get Medicaid also. So SSI is a resource-based program. So it is for food, shelter, and clothing, absolute basic needs. And you can't have more than $2,000 in liquid or non-liquid assets.
Cars.
Extra cars.
Money, bank account.
One car is exempt, your house is exempt, your household items are exempt from that. But anything else that can be turned into cash is counted as a resource. And if any of that adds up to more than $2,000, then you're not even going to be eligible for taking the SSI application. So the other thing about SSI is the resources that they're looking at are the cash on hand, or it can be earned and unearned income. So if you own a house but you can't work, but you can rent out your basement to someone, they will count that as income, even though you're not working. Whereas the SSD program, you have, it's just wages that they're looking at. So anyway.
Very complicated.
Yes. So I wanted to give just a small quickie history on the Social Security Act, because we were here last month talking about a universal basic income, and the Social Security Disability Act was one of the first attempts to try and even the playing field for income during the 30s, during the Depression. And so we have some experience with that, and that's kind of what led me to think that it would be good to talk more about this disability program, because it's especially with the SSI and the Federal General Fund for services for the poor and indigent, it is an attempt to even the playing field a little bit for people that can't support themselves. So the Social Security Retirement Act started in 1935, and it took about 20 years for Congress to realize that there were a lot of people that weren't going to make it to retirement age, but they'd been paying into that trust fund. So that's where the Social Security disability piece came in, so that people could access that.
Sure makes sense to me.
Yeah. But then there was another 10 years before they realized that insurance, medical insurance was just as important, and so that's when they started working on the Medicaid and Medicare insurance programs.
That was President Johnson, I guess, yes.
Yeah. And then it wasn't until another 20 years later, after the Social Security Disability Act came in, that SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, was added to that. So it took them that long, from 35 to 76 to 1976, to realize that there was a whole swath of Americans that weren't able to work either because they were disabled. So people were born with disabilities.
You know, I'm a psychologist, and I evaluate people, and a lot of the people I see, sort of these applications go into Social Security disability. Yeah, terrible birth problems and so on, and it's no fault of theirs or their families, but very, very needy people. So.
Exactly, yeah. No one wants to be declared disabled.
No.
No one wants to be born with disabilities.
The money, as you say, is not very much for this sort of thing.
And when we successfully complete disability applications with people, it's a huge game changer.
For them.
It is a lifesaver many times. Sometimes the process is so long that people lose everything in the wait for this federal benefit to come through.
How long are the waits generally?
So there's many tiers to this process if one gets denied out of the first gate. But from the time someone starts a disability claim to the time of that first decision or adjudicated decision, it can be 6 months. And I'll talk a little bit about the steps on it in a minute, but if you do get a denial, then you're waiting 2+ years, and people lose everything. Most people don't have a safety net, as we know.
$400. The average family does not have $400 for emergencies.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that it's much more difficult than people realize to get on benefits. And one of the reasons is Social Security's definition of disability is the most strict definition out there. And I'm just going to read it.
Yes, please.
The inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death. That's pretty serious.
Yes.
Or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. That's, people don't realize you have to prove that you are unable to support yourself for 12 whole months or more, first and foremost.
And when they say substantial gainful activity, what kind of metric is that?
Okay, that's a great question.
Good question, yeah.
So Social Security believes, or these rules are set out, that if someone can they add a monetary figure to that term. They call it SGA, substantial gainful activity. That monetary figure for any adult is $1,180 gross per month. If you can't make $1,180 a month gross, then because of medical or mental health conditions, you might be looking at filing for a disability application.
That's well below minimum wage, or is it minimum wage?
That is below minimum wage, but not much.
Okay.
If you're a person that's become blind or were born blind, if you are working, your benefit amount that you can't make more than, your SGA amount, is $1,970 a month. So that's a great question, Chris. So in this language, there was another term, medically determinable physical or mental impairment. Any idea what that means?
It sounds complicated.
This is kind of where
physical and mental.
Caleb's practice comes in. It has to be a medical condition that is diagnosed by a professional. And a lot of people don't realize that they have to have a current diagnosis. So expected to end in death or expected to last a continuous period of 12 months or more. A lot of people do not realize that when they go to apply for disability, that their medical records, their documentation has to show that they have been really, really sick for 12 months or more and not able to support themselves with that $1,180 a month.
Incapacitated, yeah.
Yes. So it is the benefit of last resort. So you're starting to get the picture on
Well, desperate people with
the barriers right off the right off the bat in this system. So here's what we have to prove. And we know that there's a lot of myths out there. And some of the things that we hear all the time is, well, my doctor is the one that told me to apply for benefits. So if he thinks I'm disabled or she thinks I'm disabled, then I must be. Well, there's a whole lot more that goes into this than just that. Or my medical records. Surely my medical records show how sick I am or how disabled I am. Well, that could not be further from the truth. And it's a big misnomer. Or another one is, it'll take at least 2 or 3 denials before I'll get approved. Well, that's not really true either. It's depending on your diagnosis and how well your medical condition is documented. Another big myth is that you can't be working before you apply for benefits. Well, you can be working as long as it's under that $11.80 a month gross. So what this boils down to is there's no partial disability like workers' comp or long-term disability or, well,
percent disabled.
Yeah, percentages of disability, VA benefits, VA disability. And it really boils down to the best thing you can do is keep seeing your doctors and start working on getting good in-depth medical documentation or psychiatric documentation on your disabilities. So we meet people all the time and their case is not strong yet in the documentation world. And so I want to talk about some of the things that Social Security never really tells people, but can be very helpful in the application process. Applications are done at the local Social Security office, but the local Social Security offices are telling people to go online and start their applications online. Well, it's a complicated business, and even the online application does not explain the questions very well. So people don't really know exactly what they're looking for. And that's another reason why I'm out here doing tips.
Well, Mellani,
and again, if you're talking about people, in order to be eligible, they have to be making much less than minimum wage. Who's to say they have access to the technology,
right,
internet, et cetera?
That's why Assist, yes.
Yeah.
Mellani's company does that. Yeah.
So if I'm working with a homeless person and they're being told to go start an application online. That's not very helpful.
Yeah. Wish they could.
Yes, yes.
So do you, I mean, you said that there are 2 ways into the system. One is a local and the other one is online.
Local Social Security office.
Which do you recommend of those 2? Does it make a difference?
Well, it can take months to get an appointment just for an application in the Portland area with the Social Security office. So we at Assist access the online application really readily. I mean, we've become pretty good at all that. But if you're trying to do it without help, I do recommend you stick out the wait and do it with the Social Security office people, because they know what these questions are about. So in preparing for a disability application, things that will help make your case stronger are collecting up as many old records as you can for that document your medical or mental health troubles. So people with mental illness, a lot of times they might have an old hospitalization in their past, and those older records are incredibly valuable. And anything that relates to your disabling condition, if you can collect it, if you put it underneath Social Security's nose, they have to take a look at it. So
in my line of work, too, very important to me when I'm reviewing records is early IQ tests and early graduation rate. Did the person graduate with a regular high school diploma or certificate of completion, just to establish a pre-existing?
Right. Yeah. What they're looking at is the longitudinal history of the disabling condition. So another thing that is really helpful is letters from friends and family who give the background information about the illness. And it's all about how well you can function or can't function because of your illnesses. School records are great. Old hospital records, as I mentioned. Letters from your doctor, supportive letters from your doctor are terrific. If there's any way a family can afford an actual psychodiagnostic evaluation, which is what Caleb does for many people, those are like gold because they're current and they give some good background information. And we really, really like it when we see psychiatric evaluations, but they're expensive and they're hard to come by. Another thing that is really helpful is any forms. There's a lot of forms with the Social Security application process. Filling out those forms really thoroughly is very helpful. Social Security sends out a lot of forms, and we found out that only like 25% of those forms come back to them. And those forms are ways to try and ascertain how disabled you are. They're always looking for clues on how well you would function if you were trying to work. Vocational rehabilitation is a state agency that a lot of people don't know about. Vocational rehabilitation is their sole purpose. They get federal money. Every state gets federal money. And their sole purpose is to try and help people with disabilities enter the workforce. And so they have a whole network of employers that will accommodate people with disabilities. They have money for psychiatric evaluations. Their whole job is to try and help people with disabilities work.
I can actually speak to that. That is a wonderful program that I am a participant in. So I am a recipient of vocational rehab, and they are putting me through engineering school at OIT, and it's an absolutely phenomenal program.
That's awesome.
The entry and the application was assisted by a counselor within the program. They helped me get all my documents together. They helped me choose a plan. And work with me to get into school and maintain all the equipment, the books, everything I needed. It's a really fantastic program.
It is a fantastic program. I'm so glad you're able to take advantage of that. And they can totally, like you mentioned the word plan, that's a whole retraining program that they're working on with you, which is fantastic, yeah. So people may not be able to do what they used to do, but they might be able to get into something easier or lighter to do. So basically, what helps strengthen a case is any kind of documentation that speaks to your functionality. So we know a lot of people that maybe have cancer but are still able to work. They might have a serious cancer, but they're still able to work. And that's because they're still functioning enough to be able to get themselves to work and hold down, maintain the job. So you're starting to get the picture. So a lot of people experience a lot of denials. And there's a big information disconnect that I want to talk about. Social Security's rules say that medical records are what they have to look at for the current diagnosis, as I mentioned. But what do medical records talk about? They talk about your diagnosis, your medications, the tests or x-rays they want you to have. They talk about your prescriptions. I think I mentioned that. Anyway, none of those records talk about how well you could function on a job. So we have to fill in the missing pieces to this story.
Something's occurring to me. The folks that are reviewing the applications for these, they're not doctors.
They're not doctors.
Right. So just by them looking at your medical record, when you send this information into them and they say you have this or that, they may not know exactly what that means to you.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
That's the lack of function.
Right.
Right. It's all about function, function, function.
Also, you know, in your forms, I've done several for you, so I know. But I love your forms that you fill out. How many hours can you sit at a job? What's the impact on you? Do you have to walk afterwards? You know, but it really gets into the specifics of physical limitations and physical activities.
Yes. Yeah, so we correspond with the doctors, and the supportive letters that we get from the doctors are really trying to hone in on that big missing piece. And that big missing piece is, with this diagnosis, what are the symptoms that are causing me to not function enough to go to work every day? And the way Social Security is looking at it is, if you can make a sentence, can still read, can still make a sack lunch, and can walk to work or get to a bus, then there's probably a job out there you can do, an unskilled job. And the examples of jobs that they use are things like a ticket taker at a parking garage. That's a no-skill job, and that's punching a couple of buttons. Some of the hospitals have big giant laundry rooms, and they have towel folding machines, and it's basically...
You know what that does? That takes away the freedoms of those people, their freedom to choose how they spend their time and what they spend it on, because that might not be their passion. And they're investing their time in that. Remember,
Social Security's litmus test is, do you have the ability to make $11.80 a month or more? So it has nothing, Social Security criteria has nothing to do with other barriers to employment, just disabling conditions. So where was I?
What jobs they can do.
Yes.
So basically, what I tell people is, getting on disability it's a high bar of proof for us and a low bar for the state.
To deny or to accept?
To approve benefits.
Okay, good.
And so, yeah, you know, there's a big misnomer that it's really that it's really easy to get on disability, and that could not be further from the truth.
Well, the documentation, what you're saying, document. And,
yes,
and
yes.
Proof makes a big, when I see files, and it's easy for me to say whether or not the condition has been well documented before.
Yeah. And if someone starts a disability application, they need to keep their records very organized, because there's lots and lots of letters that come from different places. So they need to kind of look at it as like a little legal file. And all the records that you're collecting from different places, different hospitals. We work with a lot of homeless people that have been to many different towns. And so we've tracked down all the hospitals that they have been at, and we've tried to collect as much as we could. And we keep it all in a very organized file. So since I brought up homeless folks again,
Yes.
you can imagine that they have even more barriers to this process. So in other words, the more disabled they are, the more sick they are, the more they have on their plate, the less able they are to navigate the system. So their barriers are a lot of times minimal records to begin with, because they don't go to the doctor very often, no matter how sick they are. Before the ACA, or Obamacare as it's colloquially known,
Yes.
they couldn't even find a doctor to see if they didn't have insurance. I actually cried the day Obamacare was passed. I never thought in my lifetime I would see my poor indigent clients with medical insurance. No access to...
When I talk to them, too, the people that I see, they're still excited about Obamacare and so on, too. The ability to see a physician, get medication, have these conditions checked out for the first time ever.
It's huge. It's huge. And sometimes the insurance is the more important part of this process than even the income. They finally get medical attention. Yeah. So these folks are unable to advocate themselves or report critical events like you know, that they have had to move to another city where a family member could also maybe give them a roof over their head. And so keeping track of where they are is oftentimes difficult. A lot of folks we know have substance abuse issues on the street. When you are sick and you lose hope and all of the system's doors are closing in front of your very eyes and you lose hope. And that leads oftentimes to drug abuse. But the underlying condition oftentimes is severe depression, and they're self-medicating with drugs. Sometimes barriers to applying for homeless people applying for disability are legal involvement. Some of them might have warrants out that might stop the application process. And just basically the inability to follow through with all this paperwork. So one more thing I want to mention is that there's a few steps in this process. If someone gets a denial, they get through the application and they're able to work on some of their documentation, maybe get their doctor to write a letter. The first decision comes in about 4 to 6 months in Oregon here. And if it's a denial, I should say we're almost up to 5 million new applications nationwide. And about a third of those are approved in this first step. So that means there's millions of people that are getting denied
the waiting list
each year.
Waiting list used to be something like 180 days.
Right.
Is that still that?
Yes, for this first decision.
Yeah.
If someone is denied, then they can go into the appeals process. Everybody has 60 days to appeal a denial. And so I highly recommend that you appeal it. The review process is pretty short. Even though it takes 6 months, there's big backlogs. The first people that are looking at the case are looking at it pretty quickly. So the first level of appeal is called a reconsideration, and that can take another 2 to 4 months to get that decision. If it's another denial, and there's a small percentage of people that a first appeal gets reversed and they get approved at this reconsideration level. The next level of appeal, if a reconsideration is denied, is called a request for hearing. And that is with an administrative law judge. And that can take another 15 to 18 months. So we're talking about
and anything
2
that was
years.
keeping them going up to that point is
Very
probably
difficult.
well exhausted.
Very difficult, yeah, very
Right.
difficult.
So yes, it can take from the time we start the case to the time they see a judge, if they keep the appeals going, can be 2+ years. But that's not the end of it. If a judge denies the case, then it can go to another level of adjudication where there's judges higher above the judge that you met face-to-face. So that hearing is a 1-hour hearing, and many people get denied at that as well. And so all the decisions of the judges go to another level, and it's called the Appeals Council. And that's a group of judges back in Falls Church, Virginia. And that review process, again, is many months, 12+ more months.
Well, I'm really glad to hear, on the one hand, that there are so many steps that if somebody does get denied, they have a way to try to fix that and get to someone, get in front of someone and explain their case. It's just really, really sad at the length of time that is in between these.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking how long this takes.
Yeah, I mean, living in a house without heating and water and so on, too, electricity.
Right.
Ooh.
Right.
But also, an interesting point, too, that you meant, I think it's related to this, too. There's so little fraud in this. In general, there's not much fraud in the system at all. It's just a few percentage points.
Yeah, as I understand it, there's no more fraud in this system as any other welfare or
government-run system.
Public service
Which
system.
is very low. I mean, it's just...
I think, I heard 3%.
That's what I hear generally, too.
Yeah. So if people do get on benefits through this lengthy process, There's another really important thing to know is it's not a forever benefit. People do get re-reviewed. And so it's really important if you have a disability, even if you get on disability, if you get your disability benefits approved, that you keep seeing your doctors and keep the documentation intact, because they will re-review your case, and if they don't have any more current evidence that you're still disabled, then they will stop your benefits.
Or evaluate you once again.
Will they give you a warning beforehand? So will they let you know that we're considering doing this, and please gather documents before they take it?
Yes.
But Mellani would want you to continue anyway, so you're ahead of the warning. Yeah,
of course.
Oh, tomorrow present the warning.
Because remember, this is all about documentation.
Yeah.
Objective medical evidence about your disabilities, or continued mental health treatment for your disabilities. So that's kind of what I had to give you guys.
Let me once again, we are Progressive Radio on TV, and we're here the first Tuesday of the month at Willamette Falls Media Center. And can you put on our address here, Marv? There we are, Willamette Falls Community Media Center at 1101 Jackson Street, Oregon City, Oregon 97045. And the telephone number here is 503-650-0275. 503-650-0275. And give them a call. Learn how to do the equipment, and if you have something that motivates you, they'll help you put it on. So thanks so much, Marv. Thanks, you. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Jen. Now I guess we're back. Oh, yes, also, please, if you're watching, viewers, if you have any question about this important and arcane, difficult Byzantine system, please give a call, and Mellani can sure answer a lot of questions about this. I mean, for me, I work with it fairly often, but it is so difficult for me. I'm only seeing a slice of it from my perspective. Very difficult.
And we love helping people with questions because we know it's an extremely complicated process.
I do actually have a question. I'm going to break the rules.
Sure.
What about a terminal cancer patient who can no longer work, has run through vacation and long-term disability, and now is fighting for short-term disability? How far do they have to go before they can fill out these forms and become eligible?
Why don't you repeat the question?
That's a great question. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question. Basically, when should someone apply if they have a terminal illness or very serious illness? The short answer is right away, no matter what other kind of benefits you're applying for. So usually if people do have short-term or long-term disability benefits through their employer, if they are that lucky to have that kind of thing with their employers, the short-term disability application maybe is looked at first. Then how serious that is, they'll look at the long-term disability application through the employer or the insurance company. But there's nothing stopping people from going to the Social Security office or calling them and starting their Social Security disability application right away. I highly recommend it because of how long this process takes.
So they go through the Social Security office to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
You apply for Social Security benefits at the local Social Security offices. So in the Portland area, we have one in downtown Portland. We have one here in Oregon City. We have one in Beaverton. And, you know, they're spread out all over the state. There's one in East County over on Division Street, 179th, I think, in Division. And then all the way out to the Dalles is the next one. So, but that's where the applications start. Great question. Thank you.
Now, something I noticed when I was looking into Social Security before coming in for this taping, when you talk about Social Security reform, most of that focuses on its funding, the ages at which people are able to apply for the retirement side. But none of the reform really focuses on the process of application. Elizabeth Warren is fighting the good fight and trying to bolster Social Security. But when you look over her policy pages or the policy pages of other folks that talk about Social Security, none of it has to do with the application process.
Right.
What are some things that you've seen that folks like us could put on that table and fight for to make it more reasonable for people to apply for this? and to help them be able to apply before they've fallen off the cliff. Because it sounds like you have to be, if you had a lifestyle and you were doing well in life and you've run through, all of your vacation days and your short term and your workman's comp and whatnot, it sounds like Social Security disability doesn't want to kick in until you're almost at the ground. But what can we do about that?
Okay, so that is a really good question, because it is, it's part of that information disconnect. People don't want to be labeled disabled. And so they put off applying for their Social Security disability benefits for years. But you have to keep paying in, you have to keep working and paying those FICA taxes
Anyway, yeah.
in order to be insured. So SSD is Social Security Disability Insurance. Those FICA taxes act as an insurance program. So my best advice is, if you have a serious illness and you have not been able to support yourself, or you know that your rehabilitation period is going to be more than 12 months or more, get straight into the Social Security office and start your disability application. And it starts with a phone call. That phone call protects a start date of a disability application. Do not wait. You earned those benefits. You paid those benefits. They're yours to access in this system. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why it's really important to jump on that ball.
With
To
one
get
of
it
them,
started right away. Yes. No, so the start of the protected start date of an application for SSD, they can go 12 months back to pay benefits. The start date of an SSI application, the protected start date of an SSI application, is as far back as the benefits can go. But think about this, how long it takes to get the benefits approved. So most people get retroactive benefits in a lump sum award. And then they start paying the monthly ongoing benefits.
But from your experience in helping folks get through this process and get through the application process and seeing the types of problems that people encounter frequently, what, in your opinion, would be some good reform for that application process to have the largest impact, to really help people get through this and get accepted and get help they need without going through 4 appeals and without waiting years? What can we do?
Well,
let me make it a little more specific. What are some of the biggest choke points that you encounter that you would love if they were gone?
This application.
That specific one.
Right at the beginning of the gate, yes.
Are there many models for people to see what a good application looks like, documentation and so on?
Not really.
Should be, though, obviously.
Yeah, there should be. I should say, if someone has gone through a couple of the appeals processes, the appeals, the first and second, it's usually at the hearing level where people start contacting an attorney to help them with the hearing. And I do recommend that you get an attorney to help you with that hearing. The hearing is only 1 hour, and it's very technical. And the judge is looking for very specific things, and they're looking to attorneys to help these disabled folks navigate that hearing. So, choke point, I have no idea how many people start by calling the Social Security office, start the application process, and cannot finish it.
Right.
So those big hoops right from the gate, things like getting your financial records, your pay stubs, your medical records, listing out all the places you've gotten medical attention, and that all goes into this application. It's a lot of information to gather right from the gate.
Does Social Security, does it organize materials in that way? Does it suggest getting the pay stubs and so on?
Well,
periods of work, medical reports, everything?
If you start an application, then especially online, they kind of try to walk you through those steps. If you talk to a claims representative and are working with a claims representative on the actual application, they're supposed to help you with those steps also. But a lot of correspondence happens via letters, and these letters are confusing, especially if you've applied for both programs. So another tip is, if you're getting letters from the disability process or the application, is look at the letterhead. If the letterhead says retirement, survivors, or disability insurance, that's the SSD program. if the letterhead says supplemental security income, they're talking about the SSI program. That's a good way to tell, but they're all very confusing. The letters are confusing.
You mentioned, you recommended that folks going through this first application process should absolutely have legal representation for this meeting. Are there lawyers in the area that help? Because these are probably folks that don't have legal funds set aside.
There are a lot of disability attorneys. There are a lot of national firms that do disability representation at the hearing.
And are they affordable for these types of folks?
That's a good question. No representative is supposed to take upfront money. So it's no money up front first. They only get paid fees, representative fees, that the Social Security regulates after the benefits are approved.
Okay.
But there are a lot of disability attorneys out there, but they don't do hardly any of them do this preliminary work. They're waiting for the hearing. And the reason for that is another big flaw in the system, I must say. The representative fee has nothing to do with the amount of legal work that is spent on a case. Okay. The number of legal hours. It has to do with how long it takes to languish through this system. Because the fee is set for 25% of this retroactive lump sum award of benefits. And so the flaw is the longer it takes to languish through this system, the greater the representative's fee will be by the time they have a hearing and will...
That's what they call a perverse incentive.
It's definitely, there's no incentive for attorneys to be proactive.
I think I was reading somewhere there's a maximum for payment for like $5,000 or $6,000.
There is a maximum. It's 25%. The fees are 25% of the back pay or $6,000 max, whichever is less. So in the legal world, that's a low-paying form of law. And so that's why a lot of these disability firms enroll a lot of people. They sign up a lot of people.
But for folks watching, they shouldn't be turned off by this. They should absolutely contact one of these firms and get assistance with this process.
I personally recommend a local attorney.
Local attorney.
Versus the firms.
Okay.
The local attorney has much more rapport with local doctors, and I don't know.
Well, that makes sense.
I'm not a big proponent of the large national disability firms.
But the local attorneys will function the same way. They won't take the money up front, an average percentage off the back end if they're successful.
Those representative fees are regulated by the federal government.
Fantastic. And then they would also want to call you up, of course. Well,
we get our referrals from many, many social workers throughout the Portland metro area, a lot of homeless shelters and
outside in.
And we're pretty selective about the cases we take. People don't realize that how much medical documentation they need. And so we're very much, when we're enrolling people in the ASSIST program, we're very much looking at the highest needs.
Oh, there's look at your logo there. Let's see now, ASSIST, www.programassist.org. And that is a lovely picture.
Oh, thank you.
And where on Barber are you?
We're closer down by the Ross Island Bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, so I am actually a non-attorney representative. This is one form of law that allows for lay representatives. And our focus, as I mentioned earlier, are the really extremely indigent people. Those are the cases that the disability attorneys don't take as often. So once again, we're trying to plug a hole in the system that overlooks some of the neediest people. So we really do fight for the poorest of the poor and the sickest of the sick, and we take complicated cases.
The people that I see on basis, on Social Security, a lot of them really need the resources. I mean, tearful and so on too.
Oh yeah.
Just their lives are miserable with their...
Desperate, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, destitute and desperate, yeah.
You brought up the initial application process. You said folks will start out by calling the Social Security offices. They'll be directed to a website or the forms, and then just kind of left to their devices to either successfully or unsuccessfully complete this form.
Yes.
Are there counselors within the SSA that folks can call up and work with them and help them with this, or is that not something that they're currently doing?
In the old days, the claims representative at the local Social Security office was supposed to be that person.
Okay.
And they're not anymore. Their volume, they're understaffed, absolutely understaffed. It takes a literal act of Congress to increase these budgets for these people. We have what's called the aging of America, and so the
Aging of America. Wait a second.
So the volume of the population alone is creating a huge bottleneck at the local Social Security offices. I sympathize with how huge their caseloads are.
One of the problems about Social Security in general is that with the Republicans in charge, a lot of the budgets are being cut, trimmed, and making it more difficult for people to apply. So that is a foolish economy in the sense you might save some money, but you certainly hurt the very people you're trying to help. Do you find that true too? I mean, over the years?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Unhelpful changes.
I would absolutely agree with that. And so the short answer to your question, Chris, is no.
No.
There needs to be a whole lot more programs like
Sounds like a
Assist.
no-brainer
Like
for
Assist.
them. And you brought up the Republican opposition and their tendency to cut. And something I was thinking about, and this is less about the application process and more about the overall Social Security system, but as we as a country try to raise minimum wage and raise the wages of folks, this money is based on percentage of income. So it might be that one of the reasons that they have such a hard time affording the type of staffing they need to help folks, to guide them through, to man those phones and counsel folks to the application, that could be helped by a nationwide raise of minimum wage. If we had more general income coming into the lower income brackets and the middle income brackets, that means there's more money getting paid into the Social Security Administration system. And not only would we be able to help more folks in need, but we'd be able to staff these offices with people that can help people get through the application process so folks don't spend 2-3 years on appeal after appeal.
Great point.
So if I may give you another little concept here that I firmly agree. If SSI, the maximum SSI amount is $750 a month, times 12 months, that's $8,800 a year. How many years does it take to get through this process without technical or advisory help? Imagine how many people we could be helping with a basic income.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I agree. Related, but not on topic, but related to this too. In the South, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, and so on, Florida, people look down at other people who require Social Security, disability, that require welfare, and so on, and they demean them to the point that a lot of those voters down there just say, "Oh no, we don't need it." And even though my Uncle Charlie maybe has cancer, he doesn't need it. That's okay. And it seems to me to be absolutely ridiculous how much some of those states are just turning their backs on people that really need the services and so on.
And other states that actually use those services the most.
Yes.
The southern states, the states that generally tend to vote against those programs, are also the states that make use of those programs the most.
In part because they don't know preventative medicine and so on, too. They don't have the educational resources and so on. But you're right. I mean, they do that. But the idea that, I think her name was Barbara Hochstetter or something like that. She was a sociologist from California, and she went down to Louisiana. This is, why did people vote for Trump down there? And this attitude was, I don't need the money, and also my family doesn't need the money, they don't need the money, and so on, until you go, what a mean-spirited situation that is. But no, I agree with you. The very people that spending a lot of money shouldn't have to spend as much as they do, at least not in this way. So,
So if there's people that are wondering about whether they should apply, Social Security has their criteria book right online, and I wanted to give you guys that information. You go to ssa.gov, and there's a nice face sheet, nice cover page, and they've got different sections on it, and one's for disability. You click on that picture button that says disability, and you go to the search bar, and you type in the words Blue Book or adult listings, and it's the listings of impairment. And you can actually get right nitty-gritty into whatever your disease or whatever your mental illness diagnosis is. You can read about their criteria and what they're looking for exactly. So Sherry earlier gave us a question about terminally ill people or people with really severe progressive diagnoses like ALS. In that same website, ssa.gov, you can type in what's called CAL, C-A-L. It is short for Compassionate Allowance List. And it has many types of cancer, ALS, diseases that are not going to get better, they're serious, and they eventually are going to end in death. And if you can find your very specific type of cancer in this, it's, I think it's a list of about maybe it's getting close to 200 different types of diagnoses. If you find your disease or your diagnosis in that list, call the Social Security office instantly and tell them you have what's called a CAL diagnosis. And they are supposed to turn your decision around in 3 weeks. Get it approved in 3 weeks. From the field office to the disability reviewers, back to the field office, and get your benefits going right away. And then another tip, we're almost running out of time, but one more tip is if you do have a terminal illness, call them instantly again and tell them that you have a terminal illness, you have the documentation from your doctor that talks about it being terminal, and they are also supposed to jump all over that claim as well. It's called a TERI case, T-E-R-I. So those are, and if you're a wounded warrior, if you have any serious disabling condition from active duty, that's another expedited type of claim. It's called Wounded Warrior. And I'm trying to think if there's any more. Homelessness.
What about for your children?
Disability benefits for children is another application that requires going into the Social Security office or getting them on the phone again, and they will ask you lots of monetary financial questions as well.
I tell you, the hour went by very, very, very quickly.
Always does.
Oh my God, just scratched the top of the surface. Thank you so much, Mellani. That was great.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really appreciate being able to come on and do this.
It was very, very clear what I could, but the CAL, the TERI, and so on too, the steps that you go through, I thought that was really endearing. And your program is ASSIST. But
it's an acronym for Assertive SSI Service Team.
So very, very knowledgeable, and thank you so much. And you had great questions, Chris.
I tried my best.
Oh my gosh, they were great. But
it's hard not to have good questions for someone with all the answers.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much.